Well, thank you very much for having me. Thanks for the introduction. It saved us all doing the introductions today as well, so which is very good. So I work for Amazon. I've been there for 10 months, so fairly new to the organisation. And I'm pleased to be able to be here. Amazon's a notoriously secretive company, so to get here I had to go through a gauntlet of PR professionals to actually make it here to speak, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So today I'll be operating quite a punchy 45-minute session. My eagerness really is to try and make this as interactive as we can, so it's not so much of a Q&A with my panelists before me, but more so some questions I'll be throwing at my colleagues here. But also I'd like to invite participation in terms of there's any different answers that you guys would like to contribute, but also any other questions that you might have to follow up to my question. So before I do that, I'll just introduce my fellow panelists. So I shall start nearest to me. So we've got 2 award winners, freshly appointed award winners. So I'm very lucky to have these people on the stage. But Steph Aarons from Morgan Stanley, Joe Mosley. So I've had the pleasure of being on stage before, in previous years. From Salvation Army, Yvette Stortz from Schneider Electric, and Kevin Blair, who's recently joined IBM. This is week 2.
Week 2.
Week 2. And already winning an award.
Day off to come here and do this. Awesome.
He won an award in week 2 as well.
Work.
That's pretty cool.
It's work.
So congratulations, Steph and Kevin. That was pretty cool.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Okay, so I've actually had an opportunity to do have some dialogue with the 4 panelists over the last few weeks prior to being here today, and just find out what subjects were actually going to be quite of interest to us. So we're actually going to look at 3 subjects in the time that we've got. We've got backup should we not have any kind of engagement or short answers from the panelists, but employment brand, candidate experience, and onboarding seem to be quite pertinent to the group and ones that we could really talk to and actually, with some passion and enjoy. So I'm going to kick off with the first question. So it's a bit of a juicy question. So I'm going to dive right into the subject, but it's about employment brand, and specifically, I asked this to the panel, and feel free to speak up first who wants to take that question, but what current challenges are you or have you recently faced with the communication of your employee value proposition, and how are you dealing with that?
I'm quite happy to go first.
Okay, thank you.
So the challenges we've faced have really been twofold. The ever-evolving landscape in which we operate in the digital and social space, where every day something new is coming out that is there to assist you with communicating your value proposition in different channels. And then also, very importantly, the challenge of operating as a regulated environment as financial services are, and moving with times, and ultimately communicating with the target audience that we have a tendency to attract from campus, so the millennial and Gen Z generation, but also our experienced hires, who are actually, if you look at statistics, increasingly of the millennial background, or a combination between past generations and the current one. And so those challenges and overcoming them has been at the forefront of discussions at Morgan Stanley. And what we're doing is utilizing different channels, but also at the forefront of things such as Snapchat, which was an experience in itself, both at the attraction and marketing level for both experience hire and campus, but also actually carrying these digital and social platforms into the new hire experience, so that our employees continue to experience those channels and the messages of our value proposition on day one beyond. So our induction days are all technology driven, and we utilize Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and various other channels to engage our talent and also have them involved in all aspects of our activities and be campus ambassadors or general ambassadors of the firm.
Thank you. Any other take on the same question?
I've just been at Salvation Army 6 months now, and I'm finding the employer brand is a real issue for us. Lots of people have heard of the Salvation Army, but they don't necessarily know what they do. They know about tambourines and bonnets and marching bands,
Christmas
but maybe,
bands,
but not the fact that we're one of the largest social care providers in the UK. We're 4,500 employees. A real diversity of services, but actually when we speak to people to try and encourage them to apply for roles, they're not really understanding the full breadth of what we do. And also, as an organisation, their values are that they're very humble about what they do. So they do some amazing things, but they're really not very good at shouting about it. So I've come in trying to make them shout about it, get those stories, get that employer brand out there to attract more people to come and work for us. And also to attract people who really get the values and what we do, so that they're in line with our culture, so it's not such a shock when people arrive then about the nature of what we do across the UK. So I'm really happy being here today to absorb lots of ideas around this. The great thing about going in somewhere where it's sort of a blank sheet of paper is that I feel not only have I got to catch up, but I can get ahead a little bit and use some of these incredible ideas that's going on at the moment. So very happy to get any suggestions from people about how we can do that.
Is it too corny to say you need them to blow their own trumpet?
Yeah,
or is that,
I've done that one already.
Okay. So just to build on that, so I see what Joe and Steph said, I agree with, and one of the challenges we always face is that there are 5 generations coming up for 6 generations in the workplace, and if economies keep collapsing, we might end up with 7 generations by the time my kids get into the workplace. And so to that end, you know, you've got to, it's hard to decouple the idea that you have to sell the organization, and you've got to really just present an authentic message and allow people to select in a very subtle and open and frank way, and be prepared for people to select out as well. And that challenge, and one of the challenges, you know, that I faced, I mean, less so with IBM, like a week in, so we'll see how that goes, but certainly in other organizations, particularly product-led organizations, is the employer brand is seen as an external voice, and marketing departments like to control that voice. So you haven't got only the battle with other organizations to create a compelling proposition in the market and something that people engage. You're fighting an internal battle a lot of the time with the idea that product marketing want to own the messaging, and they're not always particularly fun, and they are very binary sometimes in the way they think. So it's how can you work within the constraints of a brand? I've got some friends at like major sports brands who are the head of TA, and they're just told categorically you can't touch it externally. Like the brand has to be managed in this way. Similar to what you just mentioned about the idea that, you know, you got approvals to come through here to make sure, not that you're on message, but there's a control point, and that's no different in all corporates. Like that's not unique to Amazon. And so I think that there's, you know, fighting this two-headed monster, which is the external. Like how can you make it land with all these different people, and then how can you make sure that you follow, you know, you're playful with a controlled brand is always a challenge.
I think for us, it's certainly the external bit, but my bigger challenge has been the internal side, right? I work for a company with 165,000 employees, more than 100 countries, that has been made up of acquisitions. So it's really, you know, defining who is Schneider Electric and how is that differentiated, and getting the employees to authentically tell the story. So I've been spending the last 3 years really working with the organization and making sure people, you know, understand what is the employer brand and how can they articulate that in their own very personal way, and not just talking about all the products we make or, you know, whatever it is we do, but rather why do they like to come to work? And so we've had you know, employees go through little contests where they create their own 1-minute video, and it's really, you know, from the heart, just as a way to really get them engaged. And the same for the managers, because we found that our managers really struggle, right? We're a company of engineers, and our managers always lead with the products we make or what problems we solve for our customers, but never with, the authentic bit, the passion. Why do they actually like working for the organization? So, yeah, that's been quite a challenge.
I know you live that, so full disclosure, I actually recently tried to hit up somebody in your organization. Obviously, we don't know each other, but I actually approached a recruiter in the Asia region for Schneider, and didn't even want to entertain a conversation. Like, you know, and for a recruiter to be that closed-minded speaks a lot to how that's resonating. You know, you don't often find that.
So question, I mean, I think for Amazon, it's just to share the 2 challenges we face as an organization. Kevin's already touched on it in terms of that total product brand control, which can limit the flexibility or agility of recruiters to be perhaps more savvy and sexy and cool, you know, with the brand, but also how eclectic the different markets are for Amazon. I'm sure, you know, that's the same for a lot of companies here in the room. Schneider Electric being one where there's that acquisition of so many different flavors, different locations and cultures. You know, how do we deal with that? And I guess that's my question.
It's possibly worse for you. You've got a consumer brand. You piss off your candidates. They don't want to buy from Amazon anymore.
Yeah.
You're hiring 100,000 people a year, your company. There's a million applicants. You annoy them, that's a dent in your revenue as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's important, isn't it? And one of the big drivers, we'll be talking about candidate experience in a moment as well, and specifically to that, it's that if we do piss off a candidate in the process, then although we've not done the measurements behind it, it's common sense that they're likely to tell a bad story. We all know the classic sales stories, so for us it's especially important to make sure there's that speed and quality and compassion in the process, and within that. But I was going to ask that question for you, Yvette, in terms of where you've got those different segments and new companies coming in that may have their own brand. How are you dealing with that from a TA or HR point of view in terms of embracing that message, but also keeping it Schneider Electric as well, because that must be really challenging.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, rather challenging because every time we have an acquisition, the organization coming in says, but we're different, we're special, and they are, and that's why we acquired them. But now they are part of the Schneider Electric family as well. So it's distilling a bit what makes them special and continue to use that. And but at the same time, kind of see, okay, where is there overlap, right? Where can we really tell the same story? And I think when it comes to just our people and the diversity and the passion, that's really the common ground that we then lead with. And then, of course, over time, that tends to evolve. But it's a very fine line you have to walk because we don't want to forget why we acquired this company in the first place. And probably one of the main reasons is because they are doing something different from what we're doing already.
Yeah.
I would just add that from an employer branding perspective, it's so easy to just get stuck in the attraction element of your proposition. I can't stress enough the importance of spreading employer branding and your value proposition across your end-to-end process and making sure that it consistently shines through and the same messages are consistently shining through from the point in time where someone meets you at a recruiting activity or through your website or through a recruiter by means of a phone conversation to the point where they are in the funnel and experiencing the firm through the interview and onboarding experience. And we will talk about onboarding in a minute. The additional challenge that organizations such as Morgan Stanley often face if they're not careful in managing their workforce very effectively is to bear in mind that there are many different streams that influence employer branding. You started to speak about the marketing department. That's one player that influences and drives employer branding in organizations such as Morgan Stanley. There are many others, and trying to keep that employer brand authenticity together when there are so many different players coming in from all sides is equally a challenge at this point in time, where you're also having to act at a really fast-paced manner. Our recruiters are having to respond to candidates very quickly, and if you're not careful in that fast-paced environment, you can then lose focus on employer branding, which in the end then doesn't meet your goals.
That end-to-end point is so important in terms of that authenticity of the brand, because as soon as, and I've seen this with other organizations I've worked for and worked with, and in terms of what they brand, but then when the individual walks in, it's not quite the same thing, and it becomes a sham. Yeah. So employee advocacy, true employee advocacy is
and
critical.
Applicants no longer tell the difference between regions. You call yourself global corporation and they will email one person and expect that person to serve them across all landscapes that make up your offering. And you need to ensure that your recruiters are skilled to cater for that, because gone are the days where you can say, oh, let me put you on hold. I will find who you should be speaking to in Hong Kong or Japan or Madrid. They will walk away. So that is equally a challenge that everyone should have at the forefront of 2018.
Absolutely. I mean, I have that challenge. I'm sure a lot of you do here as well in the room. I mean, every day I have probably 30 emails, 15 from agencies supporting fulfillment centres in the UK. But a lot of them are also candidates because of my job title, in all parts of the region. And because of potential customers, it's hard to just, I can't really ignore that. So I'll be very polite and trying to help them. But it can take a lot of time, which is important, though. So I've got one last question on employment brand, and then I'm going to ask the audience if they've got any question. I'm not too sure how we're doing with mics, but I'm happy to repeat the question. We've got a mic man So at the back, so thank you very much. So one last question, and I've seen this in both lights in my time in terms of when it works really well, but when it can actually impact the brand. But where you've worked with outsourced partners or RPA partners, what's been your experience in terms of the employment brand message? Has it helped or hindered the brand?
I think from my experience, it's what I spoke to when I came and got the award before. It's a manifestation of the partnership that you've got to be prepared to upfront have them emotionally connect with the journey you're trying to take the business on. I've personally, possibly because of the way we approach that and the level of insight we're prepared to expose ourselves to, including the pitfalls, that often they can go out and represent it in a equally positive way, if not better sometimes, because of that renewed energy. They sometimes have a different voice. The narrative is slightly different in the way in which they tell it. So actually, I've never come across it as being a problem. I have seen it as a problem, but not something I've presided over. But I have seen where organizations have reacted to a moment in time, gone really big, and haven't paused for a second to build the right foundation. You know. In fact, sometimes the feedback we get, we were talking before, I'd done some work with Craig and John at Wilson. The way they approached it was they came back and said, actually, we probably don't think this is landing as well as you think it's landing. This is the feedback. And so the courage of them, when I'm the guy that signs the checks, to say, this part isn't right, really helped us evolve it. So it became a two-way discussion.
That's great. That's exactly, you touched the point where I've seen it fail was where there was an RPO project. We had to get those hires in, not enough time to establish the clear EVP. They'd go away, do something, but it would perhaps have damage. But ultimately, that was down to the time, the process to really nourish the understanding.
Yeah. I would agree.
Any other points or thoughts on that question before I turn to the audience, if they've got any questions?
I think that partnership aspect you talked about is really, really important. At Schneider Electric over time, we really selected certain vendors we wanted to partner with, and we said it has to be a really true partnership, and they have to understand us. We're large and complex, so they need to understand that bit, but they also really need to understand our culture and our EVP so they can speak to it. So over the last 2 years since we launched a new EVP, we've really had a lot of our partners in, spend a whole lot of time with us, and also we have pressure test a bit to see what's landing well, where do we need to tweak, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit too, where do we have to perhaps go in a bit different with our employer brand based on the audience that we're targeting? And I think this partnership is really key. And then those partners can tell your story the same way, or as you said, even better, because they have that connection with the organization.
My advice would be to approach your RPO or any other vendor selection process in the same way as you would hire candidates into the organization for the rest of the firm. So I would strongly advise that you build your assessments for the vendor and RPO services around the values and culture pillars that define you, so that you identify organizations that will literally be, as I like to say in my own team, an extension of your offering. So Morgan Stanley's had an RPO vendor deliver our recruiting services across Experience Hire and Campus for over 15 years. We were one of the first people to embark on a talent acquisition model with RPO vendors attached to it. Literally, every time we go and see clients, they never know that these employees they're interacting with are RPO vendors. They truly believe they are Morgan Stanley, and I think that's important. And these individuals believe they are Morgan Stanley and drive their activities and their output in the same way as we would expect any employee. Secondly, my advice would be don't underestimate the power of systems. So we work with various applicant tracking system providers, including WCN on the campus front, and their toolkit now is very much focused on the candidate experience and molding the branding piece very seamlessly into it, so that as the candidates move through the funnel within the applicant tracking system, the Morgan Stanley experience never goes away. And I think therefore, again, from a systems perspective, you should really look at that to ensure that your employer brand proposition and your messaging is equally at the forefront of that.
Great point. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or other feedback or best practices that you guys would like to share? And I see a camera, that'd be interesting, but mic's on its way.
Kate Stewart is my name. I recruit for HR and in-house recruitment roles with the Irish agency Sigmar. I thought it was very interesting what you're saying around the awareness of, especially when a candidate can also be a customer and bearing that in mind. And I was just interested to hear what the panel approaches around feedback to unsuccessful candidates. Because I suppose a lot of the time the feedback I get is candidates get very engaged in the process and very impressed with the multiple rounds, but quite often it can be the lack of feedback at that final unsuccessful that can kind of leave the bitter taste in the mouth.
I mean, I'm happy to go first, actually. So thank you for the question. And that was the thing which stuck to me first was actually how quick Amazon wants to be with candidate feedback. So there's a huge focus internally about getting back to candidates within 2 days of a pre-screen and getting back to candidates within 5 days of their on-site assessment. That's our targets we set, and that's measured with our ATS. And all the teams are incentivized on this, and there's quite a lot of good humour, good communication on reaching those targets. And I'm pleased that my team's one of the best in the region at this. But that is so important for us to get back to people, give them that feedback, not to be forgotten. And everybody is tracked, and we can see, well, by recruiter, that's who's not on top of it in terms of pace, but also by hiring manager, because we also need the hiring manager's investment in that process to truly do that, especially when there's a loop or a panel interview. So to get that feedback in 5 days, as you guys will know, all of us, it's tremendously challenging. And the other piece is, in terms of the survey, we measure that. So we have a target of 90% positive response rate in our survey. So anything below, we analyse that by location, by recruiter, by job level, just to understand how can we bring that up and get it. It's an immense target that we have, but that's driven by trying to keep the candidate happy and at the forefront. But it'd be interesting to see what else happens.
I agree. I think one of the biggest problems that arise when candidates feel that they have an issue around the process comes from just the lack of information in the process. And I think to Steph's point before, you can actually use technology. So people who are unclear on where they are in the journey, they're unclear on where they are in the timeline, they're unclear on where the decision points are. We've got to use technology to help with this, whether it's in a visual format, painting it, whether it's even the use of artificial intelligence and chatbots that Vince was talking about before, just so the candidate can connect with the company on their terms. And then, it is a problem because you want the candidate to be engaged as they possibly can all the way through the process, because you may want to hire them. And then when you don't, you've kind of got to unwind some of that emotion. And so there is the element of, keeping them informed that. But I also think there's a lot to be said. If they've gone all the way through a process where they've got such a strong emotional connection, the message should really be not no, just not now. And that, make sure that the candidate's clear that it's not the end of the journey, it's the end of that journey, but it's a branch on a tree, and there are other branches they can run across. I think that's a good way to land it, I feel.
I think managers often don't necessarily get upskilled with how to give really good constructive feedback post-interview, and I think that's an important part of the upskilling of managers around recruitment, because when someone's invested that much energy and time in the process and then they get a 1-minute email back from somebody, you can just feel flat.
You've got kids and we feel you wouldn't be committed to the job, and you're like, what the hell?
No, but it's a real skill, and it's such an important. You've got customers, we've got potential fundraising people out there every time we turn them down, so it's really important to get the managers on board.
Okay. Any other questions in the room on EVP or employer brand? That's a burning question. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Michelle Adams, O2. I was just interested in the dynamic that any of you might have experienced between having a parent brand and a local brand. So I'll be more specific. We're owned by Telefonica, which is a Spanish global business, and to date, our local brand in the UK O2 is well known, and we've tended to lead on that. I think that dynamic is shifting slightly. And it's very early days, and I'm just interested in any experiences you might have had of how you find the best of both worlds, particularly if the parent brand is not particularly known in the geography that certainly in this case I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, so not exactly the same thing, and I'll pass it across in a sec, but just to hit on the point that Yvette mentioned before about acquisitions, I've been to an event where I'm in the parent company and I've gone to a graduate recruiting event and I've seen 8 of our subsidiary businesses and acquisitions rocking up at exactly the same event with different brands. So it's not the same thing, and it's hugely frustrating. And I think you've got to try and drive to, you don't have to be the same flavor of the product, but try and be the same product, right? It's okay to have a product with different flavors to it. And I think that's a real struggle because the acquired companies often do have a cooler brand. They do offer enhanced benefits and differentiated working environments, and they want to be able to promote that, but the group doesn't. And the amount of meetings we've probably all been in, where you're a 100,000 person organization, you bought an 800 person company, and it feels like a reverse takeover because they're trying to dictate where it goes. And I kind of get that. So yeah, it's not the same thing, but yeah, I mean, it is hard to legislate.
I think that's where partnering with a marketing organization is really key too, right? Where's the brand overall going? Yeah. You have the brand, employer brand is a layer of that onion if we think about the brand of the organization of the core. And I think it's really coming up with the right strategy and how you're actually going to represent that. And we, in 2009, actually merged over 200 brands into the brand of Schneider Electric, and we only kept 3 brands separate, so that was quite the journey, but in the end, it does also take time. It just won't happen overnight or in the same year, right? If the plan is to go to, the parent brand over time, then you have to figure out the right roadmap on how you can make that happen.
And I experienced this in a previous organization as well. So there was a very strong yellow brand, and in one location, there's a very strong blue brand, which had 90-year history. And around that postcode, I'd say 50, 60 miles, people would know the blue brand, not the yellow brand, which is a bigger brand. So it was harnessing what was cool about the yellow brand in terms of that's a more global operation. It's big. This is Caterpillar, by the way. Perkins Engines was the blue brand. And had exactly that challenge. And it was a case of coordinating. The same thing happened as well, where you both turn up at a grad event or a jobs fair event. So good communication and a lot of courage was required to where you couldn't perhaps use both brands. So maybe Telefonica O2 or something like that but they don't want them together because the color scheme or the font size isn't just right. With those challenges, and we experienced those, it took time. There wasn't a silver bullet, but it just took good courage, integrity, and the focus being on trying to drive a clear message that's going to be focused on a global career for an individual. That was the line that we had in our values, so we should drive that through that type of thinking. So it's worth talking to James Atkins, who's global head of TA at Caterpillar on that one. So I'm not paid to do that anymore. Okay, so I'll move on. Thank you for the questions in the room. So we're going to talk a bit about candidate experience. So just perhaps an opportunity to hear what's kind of going on in your worlds around candidate experience. So the question is, what initiatives are you currently employing to make an impact, a positive impact on the candidate experience? Any that you can share?
I've been looking a lot at the moment, because like I said, I've got this blank sheet of paper, so it's exciting, but I've been looking a lot at, particularly around universities, the brilliant work they do on the experience of applicants to courses. So my son's just gone to Winchester Uni. Oh my goodness, he was kept informed, there's regular texts, he had little packages through the post, sort of, we really want you to be part of this, and this is what life will look like when you get here. Before he even gets there, there's, they're linking in with everybody else in the halls of residence, and I just thought this is amazing. If we could translate what they're doing around students and that integration and that whole experience right the way from first applying, that they really felt an identity with where they were going to go. If we could do that as effectively in businesses, and we often do, and certainly, I made the big decision to move from Guide Dogs to Salvation Army, 3-month notice period. I'd been offered, really big thing, and then nothing. You've got this 3-month, you're finishing off your other role, and there's that real tension of sort of thinking, well, what am I going to, have I made the right decision? But actually, there's so much good role modelling out there, and I think just using different ways of engaging with the candidate all the way through. And that will have to vary for an organisation like ours. We've got young people coming through, lots of social care work, but we also got some really traditional people who don't even have a phone, a mobile phone. So how do we make that experience good across a real diverse group of people? And that's the real challenge that the universities maybe haven't got so much of, and that other organisations have. But there's some really good practice out there at the moment that we can be picking up on.
Yeah. I was going to ask as well, Joe, in terms of with the Salvation Army, the different units across the UK and Ireland, I'm not too sure if it's wider than that, but are you finding there's different flavours that are good and bad in terms of candidate experience, and are you trying to drive to more consistent, or are you trying to encourage the different flavours?
Yeah, we're trying to drive consistency, because at the moment it really does vary. A lot of our services almost act like charities in their own right, so homelessness services, which is huge, old people services, anti-human trafficking, Employment Plus, they're really big organisations in their own right. And then we've got 700 churches who recruit people locally, who literally will stick something up on the notice board and go, yeah, you've got the job. We're like, no, stop doing that. So yeah, I'm certainly trying to bring some consistency, but also I think came from what the lady said about the parent and the, we want certain things to be the same, but we also want to embrace the fact that it's really great that they involve the local community in their recruitment for the local church and what they want to do. And it's not the same as us doing a huge recruitment campaign for a new government programme nationwide. So we need to be able to embrace the variation as well as have that consistency of experience. And that's the bit that's quite tricky at the moment. Particularly, I mean, my biggest barrier at the moment is technology, that there's certain parts of the organisation that are embracing it, that are going for it, that we're actually getting really good results from, and others that still want to send in a paper form with, you know, that's just so outdated, it's like something out of the 60s. And trying to embrace all of that at the moment is quite a challenge.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Any other initiatives in terms of candidate experience that you want to share?
I mean, just to add on the point, we're making a big deal of it. The technology point is really huge. Like, you've got to solution this stuff through technology. It's to drive an experience. We talked before about the chatbots. The idea, you know, just think about it from a productivity perspective and an engagement perspective. My recruiters are generally overloaded with work, as capacity models work like that to keep them relatively full. They've got to do dozens, if not hundreds, of calls a day. And then they've got to field, you know, they can only work within a certain amount of hours a day. So the candidate usually wants to have the conversations in the evenings, post-offer, this kind of stuff. Recruiters are then cycling through their work, or they're cycling through their home life. So even from that perspective, the idea that you can have, you've received an offer, you've got some questions, you know, you've got to find a way to deploy artificial intelligence to be able to respond to the candidate, to use like that. Things like digital offers, so simple, like most companies are still, if it's an alien concept to them, or they're scared because a legal department said it's not legal. I did an Oracle like 10 years ago. We rolled out fully digitized, the same offer for all over the world. So you've got to push back on that stuff and really drive towards, you know, it might be uncomfortable and it might be prickly and it might mean an investment, but you've got to, you know, change the dynamic, you know.
Very good. And in terms of taking the business community with you, have you guys took any different approaches recently to, so it's not just a TA or recruiter task, it's actually a team business task. If you took any initiatives into play to drive that?
We have a governance model at Morgan Stanley whereby we have people in the business who play an active role in recruiting, and they will be tasked with, you know, ultimately providing feedback to candidates, after having interviewed them, to actually organising interviews. So we do actually have some of our clients who have designated their junior resources within the business to be an extension of talent acquisition, to organise interviews and ultimately see those through, which is a huge help to the firm. But there's a big but. You need to ensure that you don't lose oversight and control, and ensuring that those support us and help us in the business are living and breathing the talent acquisition norms, policies and guidelines and process and procedures in the same way as an HR person would do in TA. So we do spend a lot of time overseeing that process. Technology goes without fail, of course, is equally very important, but the governance is imperative for another reason: buy-in from the business in order for them to assist you in turning around the recruitment process effectively and in a way that satisfies their needs, but also ensures that the candidates hear back in a timely fashion. And the latter is worth noting. Ultimately, that's really the simple success recipe for a healthy candidate experience, is making sure that the candidates feel like they're the only one in your funnel at this point in time, the only one that you're talking to. making them feel very, very special. And they ultimately, like if you are shopping on Amazon and you've bought online and you want your delivery in 24 hours, and you're chasing it after 24 hours, that is ultimately what you should be looking at from a candidate experience and avoiding those type of things. Consumer-led candidate experience is the buzzword, and I think one that we will all live and breathe in years to come, making sure our candidates are really experiencing the same process in looking for a job and securing a job in the same light as they do their Waitrose or Sainsbury's online shopping order or Amazon Christmas shopping order for personal purposes. I think that's key.
Interesting. It made me think we actually had a meeting last week where we reviewed actually what the teams are doing in the region around the candidate experience survey feedback, and the teams looked at the verbatim feedback in terms of what was good and what was not so good. What was not so good was one comment in quotation was insane level of eye contact. His eyes would not blink. So that was the strangest feedback we actually had. So for that particular hiring manager, we're going to keep an eye on that. But it just made me smile just thinking in terms of using that feedback. But normally it's about there's not enough water or there's actually not enough eye contact. But in this case, there might be some medical issue or something.
To make the offers and then pass them on to HR for HR to talk through the sort of benefits and rewards element. So I do think having a partnership with the business is critical. Now, we all celebrate technology a great deal here today, tomorrow, and in conferences to come. But I am a firm believer, hopefully I don't come across as old school, but in human element as well, and not losing that. So yes, let's embrace technology, but make sure that our candidate experience and our selection process doesn't become so technology focused to the extent that candidates only meet an human being from the organization on day one. That to me, I think is not necessarily the right way to go, but maybe I'm biased or looking at things through a different lens.
I think it's both. I think we did that when we were mapping our candidate experience. We identified the points in the process where we could use technology, and we identified points that weren't. I was actually talking before at the dinner table when we were having lunch about a head of recruitment I spoke to recently, global head of recruitment for one of the world's biggest companies, and he was saying that he'd like to completely move to AI for his recruitment, fully automate recruitment in his organization. Now, they have a really strong brand, so they probably do fill a lot of their roles from applicants. So I'd imagine the recruitment team isn't as highly skilled around the headhunting and the sourcing and stuff as they might need elsewhere. And I just kind of sat there and he was telling me, I was like, oh, that's great, because I'll be able to hoover up all the candidates where you don't know what's motivating the partner of the person to make the move, or you don't understand that they're going for this reason, or they're having a wobble around a counter offer, and your system isn't engaged, connected with them on an emotional level. So the psychology of recruitment still remains really important. So it's the things like, and again, not to come back to capacity, but it's things like at the end of the process when the offer's done and the candidate has very functional questions and very specific, or at the very start where honestly you work for a big brand and and you're out doing stuff, you post a rec, you can get like 1,000, 2,000 applicants. So you do want to use technology to help your recruiters say these are the 10 that you should call. And now to do that without some kind of unconscious bias running through the system is very difficult, and that's where the intelligence needs to evolve. But yeah, I think it's. I think you could draw the workflow of a recruitment process, and you can turn half of it digitally, and the other half you still need a human in there.
And please never forget about the candidates who have fallen off along the way. I do think there's a tendency at times with particular very big organizations to only focus on those that continue in the funnel and then ultimately end up getting an offer. And I do think it's worth noting that now candidates can just by the press of a button withdraw their application in the process without telling you why. Now, Morgan Stanley will make a well-informed effort every month to run reports on the withdrawals where they've come in, and we call these individuals or we send them a survey if they're uncomfortable sharing information over the phone to really get some data around why people are withdrawing the process. Without fail, when people withdraw, it's because someone else has gotten to them a lot sooner. So again, it highlights the pace at which we're having to now accelerate our recruitment process. And then lastly, I would also highlight the importance of keeping your talent warm before they come through the door. Often offers are generated with a significant notice periods to honor, so it can be 3 or 4 or even 6 months in some countries until your new hire comes through the door. Keeping them warm and engaging them throughout their process is critical. Otherwise, you will experience reneges, which is equally not a success story.
We did a mock-up of an app that we were thinking about building at Cisco, where it would, as part of the process post-offer, the candidate received the offer through the app, it would then push content through to them until they start. One of the things we were playing around with was the idea that Cisco is very values-driven as a company, and they give a lot of money to CSR and to charities. So we said, well, why can't we repurpose, say, $1 million of that and allow each candidate to donate $100 to a charity of their choice as part of that process?
Nice.
And then I'm sat in the room thinking, and then we could say, if they turn the offer down, we're going to rescind the money from the charity. And then maybe that's not such a good idea, you know? So it's like, we're going to make this donation, but if you don't turn up on day one, we're going to go to that charity and take the money
We'll
back.
send you an invoice.
Yeah, we'll send them an invoice. So.
Very good. Sneaky. That's good.
So Mark, did you tell the non-Blinky manager that they were...
Oh, it's fresh feedback, but yeah.
You passed it on?
Well, no, it's happening this week, actually.
Oh,
just in
yeah.
the
It
leadership
should.
meeting.
I mean, it absolutely should, because it's, you know...
It's intimidating.
It's
just weird.
It's a piece of feedback, you know.
That's very good. So I'm going to go to the room, just if there's any questions against candidate experience that you guys are perhaps experiencing or interested in sharing, or if you've got any questions for this vibe up here. So raise your hands. If not, I've got one more question. Right, okay. I won't pick anyone. I won't do what you do, Zach. So last question, and it is connected, Steph, to what you were saying in terms of making use of that time in terms of onboarding. So a question to the group, how are you developing a high engagement in the individual around the culture of the organisation about to join in that meantime and during their onboarding process? You know, what are you guys up to at the moment?
So we've actually, we are recruiting against our culture pillars and core values. So we are performing cultural fit assessment from the outset and hoping therefore that once people are ready to come through the door, they're already very much bedded into our culture in light of the behaviors they demonstrate or demonstrated in the selection process. However, on day one, we have a culture induction activity whereby not only do we play a culture video that was produced globally for individuals to experience. We also have a culture panel where we share perspectives and a networking activity that equally speaks to the culture that we ultimately live and breathe every day. And then the rest is really day-to-day engagement from a cultural standpoint by through on-the-job experience and various workshops. Every year, each division performs culture workshops, which are led by the division heads and our greatest stakeholders personally, where they work through case studies that clearly showcase ultimately what our culture is all about and how important it is to have a strong, humble, honest, and really effective culture. And so that's the things that we do. We have a giving back month that is in line with our pillars. So there's a lot going on that happens just naturally without having to engineer a process in itself.
Okay, and Joe, what about in Salvation Army?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do at the moment, I was amazed really when I joined that I've sort of got 50 of the HR team in our territorial headquarters in London, and none of them had ever been out and seen our services or the amazing work that we do. So which absolutely blew my mind. So it's about getting them out there when people first join and saying, right, we're going to give you an opportunity to go and see what it's like in one of our hostels, or go and be with our anti-human trafficking services, and get people. We've got such a powerful engagement tool through what we actually do, and get them very, very quickly to link with that. And I had really interesting discussions with our finance team who were, well, they don't really need that for finance. They're only sort of signing invoices. And we've had a real calamity with the new finance system in the organisation. And a lot of it was because the people sat in the finance team didn't understand what it was like being out there in one of our services where it's all kicking off in the middle of the night, and you can't actually get around to looking at your emails and whether you've signed an invoice of, or in one of our churches somewhere that they've got, a little treasurer who's sat there processing everything on the back of a piece of paper and not going online. So actually go out there, see what it's all about, and get that engagement very, very quickly. So so that's what we're trying to encourage right now.
It's a very powerful and good tool that you've got there, so absolutely it's a good weapon to use. So at that point, I'm going to pause there because I'm conscious that two of my panellists have got flights to catch and taxis are waiting outside, so we've got 37 seconds to go. I'd like to thank the panellists once again for being so open and transparent in the session, and congratulations again to Kev and Steph, and safe travels back.
Thank you.
As well. Thank you for the questions
for having
as well.
us.
Okay, thank you.